In the annals of Viking history, few names evoke as much fear and fascination as Hasten. A legendary chieftain, ruthless raider, and cunning strategist, Hasting's exploits spanned from the icy shores of Scandinavia to the sun-drenched coasts of the Mediterranean. He even inspired one of the most iconic scenes in the TV show Vikings, where Ragnar jumps out of a coffin and kills a priest. From the fortified monasteries of France to the bustling cities of Italy, and even being part of the great heathen army that invaded England, Hasten left a trail of chaos and conquest in his wake. He was not just a warrior. He was a tactician and a leader. His ability to adapt and thrive in diverse environments showcases this fearsome Viking leader and how he did leave an indelible mark on the history of medieval Europe. This is the saga of Hastein, the legendary Viking who carved his name into the chronicles of time, perhaps as the most badass and successful Viking warrior ever. This is Viking History with Magnus. But before we begin, remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos about the Vikings and blah blah blah. Let's get to it. Hastein, also known as Haesten or Hasting, emerged as a prominent figure during the 9th century Viking Age, a time characterized by extensive exploration and raiding by Scandinavian seafarers. Little is known about Hasting's birth, upbringing, or origin. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes him as a Dane, but he might have been from Norway, as Dudo referred to all Vikings as Danes, even though many raiders in Francia were Norwegians or Swedes. The decline of central authority in the Carolingian Empire created opportunities for enterprising Viking leaders, like Hastein. One of his early notable exploits occurred in the 840s when he joined forces with the famous Viking leader Bjorn Ironside. Together with Bjorn, he attacked southern France in 843, leaving devastation in their wake. A few years later, they led a massive fleet up the Seine River, ravaging western France between 855 and 859, where they fought Charles the Bald and besieged Paris. After holding the city under siege for a year, Charles the Bald paid them a massive amount of gold in Danegeld to leave the city alone. Hasting kept his promise and instead attacked other cities along the Seine River, something that would later lead to the king's downfall as a ruler in Francia. Around 859, Hasten and Bjorn left Francia with a fleet of 62 ships. Along the way, they successfully raided Lisbon and took Seojord Castle that had been built by the Moors to protect the city. Not long after, they also took Seville and occupied it until they had taken all that was of value. They navigated through the Strait of Gibraltar, entering waters few Vikings had ventured into before. But their next target did not go well, with Hasten being defeated by the Asturians and later the Muslims of the Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba in 859, where they lost 2 ships loaded with plunder. Success followed with the sacking of Algeciras, where the mosque was burned to the ground. They ravaged Mazima on the north coast of Africa and later occupied Nekor in modern-day Morocco for 8 days. After the successful plundering, Hasten and Bjorn wintered at Camargue Island on the mouth of the Rhone before ravaging Narbonne, Nimes, and Arles. They traveled up the river as far north as Valence before moving on to modern-day Italy. According to the Christian writer Dudo, Hasting targeted what he thought was the great city of Rome in 860. Realizing that the city was well protected by walls and soldiers, Hasten came up with an ingenious solution to fool the inhabitants of the city. Instead of attacking the walls head-on, Hasten cleverly fooled the inhabitants in what was later made into an iconic scene in the TV show Vikings. He claimed he wanted to convert to Christianity, and the priest baptized him, welcoming a lost soul to the Christian belief. A few days later, Hasten then feigned his death and requested a Christian burial within the city walls, a request the townspeople granted. Carried by several Viking warriors, Hastein was taken through the city for his funeral in the church. Once the coffin was laid down, he suddenly leaped out, killed the priest, and his fellow Vikings drew swords hidden under their clothes. They took the most prominent members of the city hostage, opened the gates, and the Vikings flooded in, sacking the city and burning 21 out of 25 churches. After subduing the city, Dudu writes that Hasten demanded the inhabitants hail him as the new emperor of Rome.
Hail, Caesar!
According to Dudo, one man responded, "This is not Rome, but the city of Lucca." This account is considered false by historians. Dudu of St. Quentin, writing more than 100 years after the events, aimed to diminish Hasten's achievements, portraying him as a foolish and incompetent savage. Historians agree that the Vikings would never have mistaken Lucca for Rome, and I, as a historian, concur. Dudo was likely embarrassed by the truth, which is that Hasten completely fooled the city of Lucca and its inhabitants. After plundering all the valuables and devastating the city, Hasten sailed down the coast and sacked the city of Pisa. When he took the city, he punished the inhabitants for resisting the attack so fiercely that he ordered his men to tilt the famous tower Torre de Pisa as punishment, making it lean forever after. Nah, just kidding. The tower was of course built over 200 years after Hastings' raid on the town. Not content with the booty they had stolen, the fleet set sail eastwards and raided parts of the Byzantine Empire's territories, the biggest empire in Europe at the time. With their ships filled to the brink with gold and booty, they headed back towards the Loire River in France, but first Hasten and Bjorn stopped off in North Africa, where they bought several black African slaves, known to the Vikings as
Blauwe mannen,
or blue men, whom they later sold in Europe. Why they called them blue men when they had words for both black
zwarter,
and brown
bruin.
is unknown, but a common pet name for a black sheep in Scandinavia was bluemen. The word is also similar to the Old English word for Africans. Blackamoor, which Oxford English dictionaries say was formerly without depreciatory force, meaning that it wasn't a negative or condescending word. Check out my video, The Vikings in Africa, for more on Vikings' encounters with African people. At the formidable Strait of Gibraltar, catastrophe struck Hastein and his fleet as they lost 40 ships, diminishing their original armada of 62 vessels. The historical accounts differ on the reason for this disaster, with one version attributes the loss to a fierce Moorish fleet assault, while another contends it was a relentless storm that scattered their fleet. Nevertheless, Hasten was undeterred by losing 2/3 of his fleet and orchestrated a relentless assault on Pamplona, leaving his usual devastation in his wake before sailing up the Seine River again. Hastings' presence in the Frankish lands coincided with a period of internal strife and fragmentation within the Carolingian Empire. But the internal conflict in the empire gave Hasten new opportunities, and he cleverly formed alliances with local lords and other Viking groups who executed opportunistic and coordinated raids and attacks upon the power-fragmented country. One of the most notable events involving Hasten during his time in France was the Siege of Paris in 885 to 886, led by Viking leaders such as Sigfrid and Sinric, and possibly Hasten. Although there is some debate about his direct involvement in this, it's widely accepted that he played some kind of role in the siege. The defenders, led by Count Odo, managed to hold out until Charles the Fat caved in to the Vikings and paid a large ransom to lift the siege. Like many other Viking leaders, Hasten began to establish more permanent bases in Francia, and he settled in the region, and his influence extended into the complex politics of the Franks. He and other Viking leaders often played a role in the disputes between Frankish nobles by offering their military services, transitioning into a kind of soldiers of fortune and, by extension, becoming important power brokers in the region. This period saw many Vikings transitioning from raiders to settlers, marrying local women and assimilating into Frankish society. Hasting's activities in France, along with Rollo the Walker, illustrate the adaptability of Viking chieftains who shifted from pure raiding to playing significant roles in the political and military spheres of the regions they impacted. After harassing the Franks for a while, Hastein set his sights on Britain, and in the late 9th century, He became associated with the Great Heathen Army, the largest coalition of Viking warriors in history that invaded England in the 9th century. The army was led by 3 of the sons of the semi-legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, who sought to conquer and settle in Anglo-Saxon territories, and Hasten joined their efforts, contributing his experience and leadership. He conducted numerous raids and campaigns in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Wessex and Mercia. These regions were significant targets due to their wealth and political importance, and here he seized wealth and captured important figures, demanding ransom, becoming even more rich and powerful in the process. Around the year 896, Hastein vanishes from the annals of history, an aged warrior once hailed as the lusty and terrifying old warrior of the Loire River, and the Somme disappears in the history books. Given the absence of concrete information surrounding his death, we can only speculate about Hastings' final days. Did he meet his end on the battlefield, or succumb to illness or injury, or perhaps find peace in retirement as a very wealthy man? Dudu of St. Quentin depicted Hastein as a ruthless warmonger, a traitor, a master of deception, an accursed figure, ferocious, cruel, and savage. Indeed, Dudu, you captured the essence of the Viking way. There's no doubt that Hasten's life and legacy are nothing short of remarkable. Throughout his extensive career, Hasten emerged as one of the most successful, longest-traveled, and most formidable Vikings to have ever lived. The only real historical Vikings that can match Hastings' achievements during his long career is, in my humble opinion, the Norwegian Varangian Guard and later king, Harald Hardrade, or the Danish king Canute the Great. The exploits of Hastein was marked by strategic brilliance and unyielding ferocity, solidify his reputation as not just a warrior, but a true legend of his time. The actor who played Hasten is, of course, Jeppe Beck Lorsen, a former stuntman, now a professional actor, but also a childhood friend of mine and the goalie at my football team when we were young, and wondered what life had installed for us. Please remember to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the presentation. And please check out my other videos to see if there are other topics you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.